Hayato was an ugly pea-brained loser who was adopted by his grandmother after he lost his parents. However, when she dies, she leaves him 5 absolute baddies who agree to live with him and clap him. Before this, Hayato finally dragged his bum ass back home to have a look at his new inheritance. The cafe was emptier than your bank account, so he figured it would be better to tear it down and turn it into a parking lot. He sat down to enjoy the silence when a girl suddenly busts out in her Victoria's not-so-secret anymore. Hayato tried to do the gentleman thing and run inside, but he ended up running into yet another Jiat, who just took off her heavenly restriction. Hayato's eyes had seen enough to awaken a Sharingan, but he just kept running into one plot bubble after the next. However, one of the girls thought he was a burglar and hit him with a diable jamble that knocked his ass out cold. He later woke up and found himself tied up by the girls, Riho, Oka, Ami, Shiragiku, and Akane. They clear up the misunderstanding and explain that they'd been living with his grandmother and working part-time at the cafe, so they considered her family. Hayato is not having any of it and says that he can eat them out since he owns the place and they're technically strangers. Uka tries to guilt-trip him for not seeing his grams in 3 years, but Hayato stands firm and insists they pack up their shit and go. The girls hold an emergency meeting at the beach, wondering how to stop him from turning their beloved cafe into a parking lot and kicking them to the curb. That's when Rio comes up with a brilliant idea. Between the 5 dump trucks they're packing, one of them is bound to bring Hayato to change his mind. The mission begins when Alka shows up at his room in a maid's outfit and offers to cook him dinner. Hayato immediately smells foul play and warns her that she won't change his mind, especially if she plans on staying PG-13. However, she insists she's simply being a good host and offers to make him some pilaf, so he agrees but asks for some fried chicken instead. Unfortunately, Oka serves up some prominence burnt chicken, giving Hayato one more reason to toss them out. Rio signals for Ami to try changing his mind, so Ami pulls up as a $2 district hoe. But Hayato remains unimpressed. That evening, the girls feast on several kinds of sausages, while Hayato sticks with his sweet buns, and just when he's getting to the good part, Rio tells him that his bath is ready. While Hayato soaks off, he expects to be ambushed by the girls trying to pull yet another hopeless scheme, but to his surprise, they let him soak off in peace. Once he's done, he heads out to check for any funny business when he notices Akane pulling out a cigarette, so he reminds her that smoking isn't allowed in the cafe. Akane tells him to relax since they're merely chocolate bars, but thinks it's rather odd that he cares what happens in the cafe since he plans to tear it down. Meanwhile, Rio's back to her schemes and this time, she's pulling out her secret weapon. Shiragiku drunk on wine. That night, Hayato tries to catch some shutai when Shiragiku busts into his room, ready to let him open all her 8 gates. This time, Hayato can't handle the meteor-sized assault on his eyes and almost unlocks a Rinnegan when Ami runs in, tosses Shiragiku out, and gets ready to introduce Hayato to pain. The next morning, they all head out for breakfast when they hear the doorbell ring, and it turns out to be the inspectors from the demolishing company. After taking a look around, they assure Hayato that tearing down the cafe is definitely the way to go, so the man rips off the cafe sign. However, this triggers Hayato's memory of the first day he and his grams opened the cafe and how important family was. Hayato stops the man from throwing the sign out, and when the girls see that a part of him still cares about the cafe, Akane tells Oka to cook him some pilaf. That evening, Uka offers him dinner, but when he insists on not dying from her toxic cooking, she assures him that pilaf was the only thing his grandmother taught her to make. Grams had taught her because it was his favorite meal, and she wanted him to enjoy it even if something happened to her. Hayato succumbs and digs in, which triggers more memories that move him to tears and a new determination. Afterward, he calls all the girls over and looks through the cafe's ledgers. Even though they're balls deep in debt, he announces that he'll take a year off school and run the cafe in his grandma's place. So the girls agree to stay and work for him. Now that they're all in, Hayato suggests they get to work and split the chores, but the girls whip out every excuse in the book, from breaking nails to low blood sugar, and refuse to help. They reveal that his grandma did all the cooking and cleaning when she was alive, and Hayato accuses them of sending her to an early grave. The guilt-tripping works like a charm, and they finally get to work, though they all suck at it except Shiragiku. Hayato keeps watch, making sure they don't screw around. When he checks on Oka cleaning the stairs, he catches a glimpse of her private section. Rio tells Oka she's giving away premium content for free, so Oka freaks out, causing her to slip and fall toward Hayato's face, but only to stick her foot in his face. Later, Hayato tries to help out with the laundry when Oka catches him with her underwear. All the girls gather to call him scum, but when he says they're just underwear, the girls start overflowing with cursed energy, and Hayato immediately surrenders. As punishment for being a creep, Oka sentences him to clean the cafe alone, and while he's there, he notices his grandma's favorite coffee mill, which triggers old memories of her again. Shiragiku pops up and tells him to be careful with it, but Hayato reminds her that he was her grandson, so she taught him just how to handle it. She then thanks him for making the rest of the girls pitch in, saving her from becoming yet another Cinderella story. Hayato tells her she doesn't have to be so formal with her and encourages her to treat him like family. So she happily invites him to the family dinner. They all gather for dinner, and Ami notices the cherry trees in bloom, and it really starts to feel like old times with Grandma. That night, Hayato soaks off in the bath, wondering how his grandmother didn't die of frustration earlier when Aoka walks in butt naked. She accuses him of not putting a sign up to show it was in use, and Ami shows up to dish out his punishment. Later, Hayato calls all the girls to the cafe, hoping to practice his coffee-making skills on them. The girls assume that he's probably gonna serve up some sewer juice, but Hayato remains confident since he watched his grandma 1,000 times. He pours in the coffee beans and starts preparing the best coffee the girls will ever taste, making the girls wonder if he actually knows what he's doing. The moment of truth arrives, and the girls each take a sip while Hayato waits for them to bow at his feet and worship him. However, the coffee tasted so weak that they all agreed that the cafe was doomed to fail with such shit-tasting coffee. That evening, Hayato stays behind to practice his coffee, but it's no use. He just can't shake the shit taste. That's when Akane walks up and drops some change to pay for the coffee she's about to whip up. Hayato challenges her to make him a cup of coffee after dissing his attempt, and even though he's being a spoiled brat about it, Akane hands him a cup and walks off. However, after just one sip, Hayato walks over to her table and admits she makes them just like his grams did and begs her to teach him. Akane thinks his bedding is adorable and agrees to bring him up to speed. The next day, Hayato drags Ryo with him to make some courtesy visits to let their business partners know they're reopening. She was the sensible choice since everyone else either had a bad attitude or was simply an airhead. They head to the first business partner, and when Hayato's words are all about his grandmother's complaints, Ryo steps in, apologizes for him being a blockhead, and even charms the man into giving them discounts for a while. They head to more business partners, and Ryo continues to take the lead, making Hayato seem like an incompetent waste of chromosomes. Afterward, Hayato scolds her for running her mouth and not giving him any space to shine, but Ryo tells him they have one more stop. They head to a shrine where Ryo explains that his grandmother always said to report any new venture to the gods, which surprises Hayato, since he thought she was just an empty chatterbox. Ryo fires back and tells him that she had to step in because he was being disrespectful to the people they were asking for help and couldn't even bow to show that. With this shitty resolve, he'd probably run the cafe into the ground. Hayato remembers his grandmother's resolve and apologizes for his mistake, determined to go back to all the vendors and treat them with respect. As he walks down the stairs, Ryo calls out to him and gives him a sneak peek at her piece as an apology for being too hard on him, but he falls back out of shock and passes out. Ryo pulls out a fortune paper that says she'll find romance at work, but concludes that it must be trash since Hayato's so hopeless. Days later, Hayato and Oka keep fighting over laundry, so Ryo approaches Hayato and tells him that the cafe owner can't afford to fight with his employees cause it will be bad for business. Hayato sucks it up and tries to approach Oka while she's hanging clothes, but he can't think of any method to tame the wild beast. Akane interrupts and suggests simply complimenting her, so he musters up the least believable smile he can manage and compliments her effort doing laundry. However, Oka throws her slippers at him and tells him he looks like roadkill, and they both descend into their usual rabid fights. His next attempt at dinner was even worse as he complimented all the food except the salad which only Aoka made. After that disaster, he retreats to the cafe where he laments having nothing good to say about her. When he leaves, Ryo calls his attention and asks him to inform Aoka that the bath's free. When Hayato tries to call out for her, she doesn't respond till he enters her room and finds her in a maid's uniform for the cafe. Hayato tries to compliment her, but ends up saying that the uniform can at least distract from her fugly face. He thinks he must have screwed up yet another chance when Aoka surprisingly thanks him for it. Hayato tries to remind her that he just called her a crime against nature, but Oka doesn't mind since he complimented the uniform she made. She explains that her dream is to be a fashion designer, and Grams had once told her that though Hayato's tongue works faster than his brain, He never lies. With this, she compliments his coffee, and they finally share a wholesome moment till Shiragiku appears out of nowhere and starts sucking on him. Apparently, she got drunk on Oka's poisoned salad. So Ami takes a picture of them to prove that Hayato is a cultured degenerate. The next day, Hayato announces that they'll finally be able to open the cafe soon, and they all seem excited by the news except Ami, who is suspiciously quiet. Hayato doesn't think much of it and hands them all an advance pay for their work at the cafe. They tell him not to overdo it since he's pretty broke too, so he reveals that he's been dealing in the stock market and one of his investments began to take off. Later, Hayato heads off to the beach for some alone time when Ami walks up to him and asks him why he thinks they've all been able to get along well. Hayato thinks back on their words about his grandma and realizes that his grandma must have been preparing them for her death all along. Hayato thanks Ami for making him realize this, shocked that she's not just an airhead until Ami reveals that she thinks she's the reason they get along so well. Now that Hayato has confirmed he's dealing with an idiot, he just goes along with it, so he doesn't start any more drama. Just before she leaves, Ami warns him that the things precious to him might break someday and apologizes if she's responsible. Well, it turns out she already wrecked his phone and laptop earlier, which is why she'd been trying to master Oogway herself out of taking responsibility. To make matters worse, Shiragiku suddenly informs him that the company he invested in just went bankrupt. Hayato realizes he's got to get rid of those damn NFTs, but now that his computer's broken, there's nothing he can do. The next day, the cafe gets ready to reopen, and Hayato tells them to give it their best shot now that they're flat broke. Rio also reminds him to stay focused and composed even if one of the customers is rude or mean. With that, the cafe opens, and they finally get their first customers of the day. They get complimented on the new uniforms, but the moment of truth comes when Oka serves their coffee, and they nervously wait for their reactions. Thankfully, the men comment that it's pretty close to the original, and assure them they'll be coming back for more. Not long after, more customers pour in and the girls are busy serving and entertaining. However, everything goes south when a familiar turd-faced man shows up, and Hayato recognizes him as one of his grandma's old creditors with an incredibly bad attitude. The man demands for their most expensive coffee, but when he recognizes that Hayato is the old lady's grandson, he calls him over. Hayato sucks up his hatred for the weasel-faced Grinch, and even bows to pay his respects for the help he offered in the past. However, the man begins to gloat over his grandma's pathetic groveling at his feet, causing Hayato to almost rearrange his face. But in a shocking twist, he actually stops the rest of the girls from smacking some sense into the old grump. The man suddenly grabs Shiragiku's dress and lifts it wide open to complain about how tacky the uniforms are, but Hayato grabs his grimy hands and tells him to get his ass out or else he'll sue him for harassment. The rest of the customers offer to stand as witnesses against him, so the turd face finally gets the message and leaves, warning that it's not over just yet. Everyone calms down, and Hayato tells Shiragiku to sprinkle salt outside to get rid of the bad omen. And while she's outside, Shiragiku comments that Hayato hasn't changed in the last 15 years. The next week goes by and the team continues to do their best at the cafe, but less and less customers come by till the place is completely empty. At dinner, Hayato relays his plan for them to split up, so they can set up a stall at the Cherry Blossom Festival. The girls agree and suggest updating their menu, so Hayato leaves the girls to the task. Shiragiku starts working on a new cookie recipe using cherry blossom liquor, but Hayato immediately points out the obvious red flag. Shiragiku assures him that the alcohol evaporates when cooked, so it'll be safe for even kids to eat. While the experiments continue, Rio busts in and asks what she can help with, so Hayato puts her in charge of the cafe while he's away, calling her the management genius so she gets off his back. After she leaves, Shiragiku tells him she never would have thought they'd end up working together like this, but Hayato misunderstands her and thinks she's talking about the stories from his grandma. Shiragiku tells him she was inspired to cook by an amazing smell she once smelled at a restaurant when she was little. When Hayato tries to find out what it is, she reveals it was something that smelled similar to his sweat. Hayato tries to back off from the crazy when she tells him she was just kidding, leaving him relieved. While she was kidding about kidding and jumped onto the sweaty fool. As she starts stripping him, he realizes she somehow got drunk off the evaporated alcohol, and now he's a sitting duck. However, Rio returns and accuses him of getting rid of her, so he can get Shiragiku drunk and fool around. Meanwhile, Oka finishes adding the last touches for the cafe uniforms, including a matching hairband, when Hayato busts in and suddenly grabs one. Shiragiku comes in right behind him, so he uses the flowers to censor her meteors, but unfortunately, Ami sends in flying for seeing free content. When Hayato escapes, he heads to the cafe and Akane offers him a cookie recipe she and Grams had worked on before she died. Hayato scolds her for not bringing it up earlier, but she apparently thought his cluelessness was cute. The next day, Hayato and the girls set up at the festival and start attending to customers when they notice Aka on snooze mode, and Ami shoves a bun in her mouth to get her up. Muka feels terrible that she fell asleep on the job, so she heads to the restroom to wash her face. However, as she's about to return, she bumps into some boys who got a thing for girls in uniforms. The Sims follow her all the way to the cafe stand, hoping to get her to go out with them, so she runs to Hayato for protection. Hayato warns the guys to back off, but they size him up and sees just a male Sakura, so they insist on staying. At this point, the bozos are causing a scene, so the other store owners gather around to chase them off. The boys see they're outnumbered and unwanted, and finally back off, and peace returns to the festival. That evening, Hayato and the girls celebrate how well the business is doing, excited to go back and crush it the following day. The next day, the trio returns to the festival to set up, only to find that their stall has been turned into a garbage heap. Hayato guesses it's those snot-nosed bullies from the day before, and it turns out that the leader of the Sinister Three is actually the grandson of the cafe's arch-nemesis. The other vendors offered to pitch in and clean up for reopening, but Hayato declines and withdraws their stall, not wanting to cause them any more trouble. The trio heads back to the cafe when Aka stops and apologizes for causing all this trouble in the first place. Hayato assures her it's not her fault and even asks for her help in salvaging the situation. Back at the cafe, Oka glams up his grandma's old food cart, and just like that, they're back in business. He tells Aka to have Riho create awareness on social media, while he gives Ami a special task. That evening, the cart gets swarmed with tons of visitors, thanks to Riho's expert social media marketing. As for Ami, her two conflicting brain cells finally came in use as she became a human delivery bike and kept bringing fresh supplies from the cafe. After wrapping up for the day, Hayato sluggishly hauls the cart back with the girls till they run into the three bullies. The boys basically admit to trashing their stall at the festival, and when Hayato tries to stand up to him, the big guy decks the daylight out of him. However, Hayato announces that they now have just cause for self-defense and signals to Ami to do her thing. The girl comes flying out with that Mortal Kombat kick, delivering a flawless victory over the first loser. The other guy rushes in to take her on, but meets the same fate, leaving the big guy for last. However, Ami begins to run out of gas, thanks to spending the whole day as a talking donkey. Fatso tries to take a swing at her, but Ami launches her flower missiles to distract him and finishes with a smooth uppercut. The guys finally get the message, but just before they take off, Hayato makes sure to warn them that Oka's even more dangerous than Ami. The boys run off scared, and Hayato reveals that he recorded the whole thing and will make sure they never bother them again. As the cave continues to run successfully, Shiragiku commends Hayato for acting more like a cafe owner. Now then, Ryo busts in earlier than usual and is eager to help with the customers. That evening, the girls discuss how busy the cafe has become, and Akane warns Ryo not to try so hard, which surprises her. Afterward, while all the girls are asleep, Hayato finds Ryo working on content for the cafe's social media. He finally asks why she's working herself to death, and she reveals that the cafe saved her, so she wants to do all she can for it. Hayato doesn't know what she's on about, but he tells her not to work overtime since they're still broke. However, this triggers Riho's traumatic memories of being treated badly by her mom. She begins to freak out, thinking Hayato means that she's an embarrassment, but he calms her down and assures her she can simply live for herself. Riho recognizes these words as the same ones his grandma told her, and she's moved to tears as Hayato promises to look after her. When he leaves, Riho starts to wonder if her fortune paper wasn't so wrong after all. The next day, the harem gathers to discuss new plans for the cafe, but Akane says she'll leave them to it as she has other stuff to do. When Hayato asks what that was about, the girls explain that she has concerts with her band, but for some reason, she never lets them watch her performances. Riho suggests that she might actually just be Johnny-san's co-worker, but Hayato assumes her band just isn't good enough. Later, Hayato buys a new toaster for the cafe when he hears some girls talking about how great Akane's band is. He decides to check them out for himself and is surprised to find a massive crowd of fans rocking out to Akane's impressive performance. After the show, Akane passes up on hanging with the other band members so she can eat dinner with her family. but when she turns to leave she runs into Hayato. For the first time, Akane is completely flustered when she discovers that Hayato saw the whole show. Hayato doesn't hesitate to taunt her about how passionate lyrics can come from such a try-hard emo girl, and for once, she has no comeback. On the way back, Hayato asks why she's keeping her band away from the girls, so Akane explains that it would be like bringing your kids to work, which is too embarrassing for her. Hayato commends her for having a dream and promises to keep the cafe afloat, so she can live out her dreams, but Akane insists that she's actually not passionate about anything. Hayato calls bullshit since no ordinary emo kid could move people with their singing so much that he bought a CD. Akane is moved by his words, till he starts criticizing their shitty band name, and they go back to bickering. A week later, the girls enjoy an afternoon without Hayato, and begin discussing how weird it is that Hayato isn't fazed by naked girls. Shiragiku suggests that it's only because none of the naked girls have tried to make a move on him, and everyone goes silent. Since no one has the heart to tell the drunk lecher the truth, they change the subject to who Hayato will marry. One by one, the girls say they'll pass except Akane, who surprisingly doesn't mind the idea. Ami pitches in and says she'd rather fight crime with him and proceeds to show them her new moves right as Hayato arrives and becomes her practice dummy. Hayato finally undergoes his solo leveling and tries to isekai Ami out of this world. Some days later, Ryo returns home and overhears Shiragiku telling Hayato that his thing is too big to fit inside. Ryo assumes the worst and busts in to stop them from going further without her, but she discovers they're just making sandwiches. Ryo mocks him for how awful his sandwiches are, but Shiragiku commends him for trying his best, which makes him happy. Ryo wonders why he's so moved by her compliment and gives him one too, causing him to pat her head in appreciation. Meanwhile, Ami tries practicing her racing in, but since this is the wrong anime, nothing works while Aoka wonders why she's stuck with the idiot today. Back at the house, Ryo starts getting jealous of Shiragiku and Hayato's sandwich bonding and butts in to suggest a new recipe. Shiragiku insists that customers would prefer Graham's original recipe, but Ryo insists that they should try something new for a change. Hayato begins siding with Ryo, which ticks Shiragiku off, so she offers to make him some of Graham's best sandwiches to prove him wrong. With that, Ryo decides to make her new recipe too, so he finally be forced to decide. Once they're all done, they hand their sandwiches over to him for judging, but Hayato just continues to chug down his own failures, claiming to prevent wastage. When he's done, he says he's too full to try any of theirs and leaves it to the rest of the girls to decide while he lies down. And Ryo and Shiragiku finally compliment each other, while Ami gets stuck with Hayato's awful failure, which she's surprisingly into. The next day, Ami starts acting sane, so Oka calls Hayato's attention to how strange that is and suggests taking her to hospital. Hayato tells her she's overreacting and would rather focus on setting up his new laptop and phone. However, later at the cafe, Ami offers to clean the dishes and Hayato finally admits she might have a tumor. That's when Akane reveals that Ami had lost her last carrot fight, which is probably the cause. Back in the house, Hayato confronts Ami about her loss, and she admits that after she lost, her instructor told her some things are just impossible, no matter what you try. Buka appears and tries to cheer her up, but Hayato warns her not to give unrealistic advice and tells her to try other techniques instead. Ami agrees and reveals that she had tried the racing in mid-fight and got smacked in the head for it, and that's when Uka realizes that she lost to her own stupidity. Hayato simply tells the pea-brain to keep trying her best. Unfortunately, Hayato comes to regret that advice as Ami foolishly drops her dumbbell on his laptop again. This time, Hayato's rage turns his face blood red, so Ami offers her melons up in exchange, and Hayato's so out of it that he actually grabs them and squeezes, but it does nothing for him. Uka's so shocked by Hayato's reaction that she drops the dumbbell on his phone, so Hayato chases after her and demands to squeeze her grape seeds too. Some days later, Hayato notices the girls acting strangely at the cafe and hardly pulling their weight. When he goes to ask Ryo why she's not at the cafe, he finds Oka and Akane stripping and takes a slipper to the face for it. Despite his visit, the girls still don't come out. When the cafe closes, Hayato realizes that the girls are just part-timers, which means they technically don't owe the cafe any loyalty since they're not really family. He plans to make that clear at dinner, but when he enters the house, the girls throw him a surprise 2-month anniversary party for the cafe. They'd all confess why they had been acting strangely all day, and Akane and Oka even had to strip because that was the only thing distracting enough to divert his eyes from their preparations. They'd all thank him for allowing them to stay there, and Hayato gets touched by their gesture. But while they continued to goof around, Akane gets a call from her mother. When she goes outside to take it, she looks sad at the outcome. For the next few weeks, Akane starts acting nice and motherly, which is unusual for her. One morning, she finds Hayato practicing his coffee skills, which reminds her of how much his grandma worked to keep her coffee quality the same. She compliments him on being just like his grams when he suddenly asks if she's planning to quit the cafe. Surprised that he figured it out, she finally admits that she's moving out that week due to family circumstances. She then offers her melons up for a squeeze, but when Hayato has zero reaction, she tells him her fans wouldn't have passed up the chance when she was in the band. Hayato catches the past tense and realizes she's quit that as well, so instead of taking the free squeeze, he asks her on a date. Later, Oka tells the rest of the girls about their date, and they wonder what in the hell is going on, while Ami looks away suspiciously. Hayato and Akane head on their date, but it just turns out to be Hayato's last chance to squeeze all the information about coffee making out of her. While he questions her, she remembers his grams telling her that the coffee maker has to put her heart into the coffee, which means she should always say what's on her mind. Back at the house, Andy can't keep quiet anymore and tells the girls what she heard Akane telling Hayato she'll be leaving soon. Meanwhile, Hayato and Akane return to the cafe, and Hayato asks her to prepare one last cup of coffee for him. While she makes it, she asks Hayato why he hasn't asked why she's moving back home, so he says it's up to her to share it if she wants. With this, Akane explains that she comes from a reputable family in the trading business, but since her dad died when she was young, she became the heir to the business. Now she has to join the company, take a husband, and produce an heir. When she learned her fate, she begged her mom to let her have 1 year to live her life as she pleases, but now that her time is up, she's happy to go back and fulfill her role. Hayato takes one sip of her coffee and tells her she's definitely chatting shit since her coffee tastes awful. At that moment, the girls bust in and beg Akane not to leave, so Akane remembers Grams assuring her that she'd do something about her situation when the time comes. Now that she's gone, Akane turns to Hayato and begs him to do something in her place, and he agrees. Some days later, Akane's mom sits with them at the cafe, wondering what business a cafe owner has with her, but when it's time for Hayato to speak, he simply tells her Akane has something to say to her. Akane tries to ask for my time away from home, but her mom immediately shuts that down and accuses her of wasting her life, reminding her of how hopeless she was that she couldn't even make tea. Hayato asks Akane why she's not defending herself, and Akane fires back and reminds him that he was supposed to do something for her. However, Hayato scolds her for not being able to stand up for her own life, and even suggests she'd be better off going home. Akane finally snaps and turns to her mother, but this time, she simply offers to make her a cup of coffee. Meanwhile, Ami reports to the rest of the girls that Hayato botched up the mission and told Akane to quit, so they unite to take matters into their own hands. Back at the cafe, Akane serves her mom some coffee, while Hayato explains that he learned everything he knows about coffee from her. When her mom finally takes a sip, she admits that the coffee is actually excellent and agrees to let her daughter stay. However, just as they're wrapping things up, the girls barge in and insist that she let Akane stay, tossing Hayato to the side in the process. Akane tells them the good news, so they finally calm down, but it's already too late for Hayato, who's the cafe's new footmat. As Akane's mom steps out to leave, she tells Akane that she'd call the arranged marriage off, but in exchange her daughter better not lose the boy she likes to the rest of the competition. Later, Akane finds Hayato at the waterside, hugs him, and promises to make coffee for him for the rest of their lives. Some weeks later, Hayato hands the girls their paychecks for the month and tells them he has an important announcement. The girls immediately start dreaming up their plans for the summer vacation until Hayato breaks the news that they won't have one thanks to his brilliant idea to open a beach hut. Meanwhile, Akane apologizes to her band members for quitting, but they tell her they're just happy to have her back and finally accept her suggestion to change the band name. Back at the house, Hayato continues discussing with the girls and informs them that since a beach hut is expensive to build, they'd be going all in on the bet. Shiragiku suggests making a watermelon parfait for the menu while Oka shows up in her proposed beach uniform. Hayato gets flustered by the lack of censorship, and when Rio sees this, she storms off angrily. They'd all think she was mad about them goofing off, but it turns out she just went to get her swimsuit on to join in the teasing. In a matter of minutes, all hell breaks loose, and even Shiragiku joins the competition with her natural body suit, while Ami remains passed out from hunger. Akane returns from band practice to find the chaos, but she doesn't bat an eyelid as she simply wants to tell Hayato that she changed the band name like he wanted. Later, Oka and Akane both realize that Akane might have feelings for him, which brews more competition. The next day, Ryo insists they take product pictures for the new beach hut. So Shiragiku does her magic and Hayato is tasked with taking the right photo before Oka devours it. Hayato lets his perfectionism get the best of him and barely gets 2 pictures out of it before Ami starts goofing off and Oka starts chowing down. When Hayato asks Shiragiku if she can make another one, she explains that they're out of watermelon, so Ryo comes up with a new plan. The girls all whip out their cafe uniforms and pose for website pictures. However, before long, Ami loses focus and runs to the ocean to have some fun. The other girls decide to get in on the fun and join her in the water, and while they're all goofing off, Hayato finally gets a good photo of them together. Weeks later, they open the beach hut, and business actually goes well thanks to the goofy photo with Ami. Their business partners stop by to support, and everyone seems to be having a great time except Ryo, who continues to work her ass off like rent is due. After a while, she notices Akane getting chummy with Hayato and goes over to scold them for slacking off, but Hayato assures her they were discussing how to get the orders out faster. Akane apologizes for not helping out with the tables, but Ryo snaps and tells her to get to it if she knows. But when Hayato tries to figure out why she's so irritated, she suddenly gets dizzy and almost falls over. She insists that she's fine and tries to get back to work, but this time she ends up passing out completely. While she's out, she has a nightmare about being abandoned, and when she wakes up and finds herself all over Hayato. He explains that she had a mild heat stroke because she overworked herself and didn't drink enough water. He tells her to quit overdoing it already, which makes her think she's being a nuisance again, but he assures her that he's actually worried for her. With that, she apologizes and promises to be more careful next time. She then asks him to stay a little while longer with him and for one more favor. Akane happens to be walking by as she hears Ryo ask for him to apologize to Akane for her. The next day, Ryo resumes at the beach hut feeling much better, so Shiragiku tells her Hayato was really worried about her when she collapsed. Ryo feels touched and goes to see him only to find him swarmed with hot beach babes. She jealously swats them away like flies and chews Hayato out for losing focus. Meanwhile, Akane mans the main cafe with Oka, but thanks to the beach hut's success, no one's showing up. Out of boredom, Akane offers to teach Oka how to make coffee and she accepts. Back at the beach hut, Ryo continues to work her ass off, and Hayato praises her for being naturally sociable. Then he asks Shiragiku why she's not looking for a permanent job yet since she'll be finishing college soon. She tells him she's got somewhere in mind, but of course, the idiot doesn't know what she means. Ami rushes up and reports that the 3 eggheads from before were causing chaos at the hut yet again, so Hayato orders her to scare them off. Ami takes the order a little too literally and starts showing off horror movie masks to scare the guys. But the scariest part of all comes when they realize she's the same girl who handed their asses to them after the festival, and they finally run for it. Back at the main cafe, Luca proves to be so bad at making coffee that it's even impressive. Meanwhile, Ryo thanks Ami for the save, so Ami says it was all Hayato's idea, which makes Ryo feel touched once again. She goes to thank him but finds yet another unwelcome harem forming around him, which makes her mad. Some days later, the group decides to take a day off at the beach, and while the rest of the girls head into the water, Akane goes off to find Hayato. She finds him fishing at his regular spot and tells him about the new love song she's writing while Ryo watches from a distance. However, just as Akane is about to reveal the lyrics, Hayato catches onto something huge and struggles to reel it in. Eventually, he falls over while Ami comes up to reveal she was behind it, but ends up getting a well-deserved headbutt. Later, they all head home after Ami gets chewed out for being brainless, but Ryo remains eerily quiet. The next day, work resumes at the beach hut and Ryo continues to go full speed ahead while Hayato worries that she's overdoing it yet again. Meanwhile, Akane goes through another painfully dry day at the main cafe with the bonehead, Ami, to keep her company. She asks Ami if she's interested in learning coffee making. She agrees, and to Akane's surprise, she learns that you don't need a brain to make coffee. Back at the beach hut, Hayato scolds Ryo for overworking without rest or food and forces her to take a break to get lunch. While Ryo rests, some tea producers show up and ask to do a feature on their hut since they're getting such amazing reviews. Hayato says it's all thanks to Ryo. who happens to appear at that moment. Suddenly, the TV guy recognizes Rio as the genius child actor from 15 years ago, and after saying her full name, the rest of the customers suddenly remember who she was. However, when they realize she went from being a star to working for a coffee shop, they say she fell from grace and this causes her to run off. Later that night, the group has dinner without Rio, who claimed she wasn't feeling well. Once they're done, Oka checks out Rio's old movies and remembers her conversation with the TV production guy. Apparently, Rio had been a diligent actor and her mother had pushed her to do even more, while her father wasn't happy about that and wanted the opposite. Eventually, Rio started to fade out of stardom when they discovered her parents were getting a divorce. That evening, Rio sits outside, wondering why her father still left her, when Hayato comes out to check on her. He'd finally realized that her social talents weren't just natural and were forced on her from when she was a kid. However, Rio explains that it didn't mean a thing in the end since she was merely replaced when she got older. Hayato assures her that the cafe wouldn't be a success without her, so it eventually paid off, but tells her he's worried about her health if she keeps overdoing it. This reminds Rio of her father's words, and she yells for him not to leave her. And though Hayato has no idea what she's sobbing about, he promises not to. The next day, Rio goes back to normal, and the girls assure her that regardless of her past, she's just part of the family now. Days later, Oka walks into the beach hut acting strangely. Ami immediately runs up to her with one of her dumb antics, so Oka scolds her to take her work more seriously. Everyone's surprised at this, but Hayato immediately spots the problem. Later, as Ami runs off to the main cafe, Oka follows close behind only to meet another Oka, which sends Ami's pea-brain into overdrive. It turns out the duplicate is actually Aoka's twin, Kika, who wants to have an important meeting with the whole house. That evening, Kika chews out Aoka, refusing to attend college in hopes of being a fashion designer, only to end up in some small-time cafe. As if that wasn't bad enough, she rips into the girls and Hayato and calls them all lowbrow trash unworthy of working with Aoka. Buka immediately slaps the audacity out of her sister, who storms out, telling her to do what she likes. Buka apologizes to everyone and explains that her sister must resent her for being the twin who had to follow in her parents' footsteps, while Aoka gets to do what she wants. The next day at the beach hut, Oka is seriously off her game and even ends up bumping into customers and breaking glass. However, Hayato notices Kika watching from afar in that lame excuse for a disguise. Kika leaves and remembers Oka bragging about the cafe's cheesecake, so she heads there to try one. But when Ami whips out another goofy mask, she struggles to keep it together and leaves. Later that evening, Oka thinks back on how close she and sister were, but after Kika offered to go to college in place of Oka, they drifted apart. Just then, Hayato busts in and tells her that her sister stopped by earlier, which means she's probably just worried about her. He advises her to take the next day off and patch things up with her real family so she can go back to normal. The next morning, Oka apologizes to the girls for taking time off, but when she heads out, she finds her sister coming toward her. They both take a walk and Oka starts apologizing for being a selfish brat. Kika cuts her off and says that she's happy with the path she followed, but after seeing the cute outfits she made for the other girls and how much fun they have, she wondered why Oka never did the same for her. Oka then apologizes for slapping her and says she's still her precious sister, which cues Kika's waterworks. After they make up, they head back to the house so Kika can apologize to the others. But when Oka opens the door, she finds Hayato buried under so many plots that she shuts the door immediately before Kika gets the wrong idea. Akane comes to the rescue and suggests they head to the cafe for some cheesecake and coffee, and Kika is finally happy to bond with her sister. Weeks later, summer finally ends and the group enjoys one last break together, while Akane stares at Hayato. Later, Hayato goes over the cafe's numbers and Akane walks in to check on him. After beating around the bush for a while, she asks Hayato if he's realized how a certain someone feels about it. But when Hayato tries to act dumb, she lowers her shirt to show him a sign he can't miss. She ends up confessing her feelings for him in code, and when Hayato finally understands, he says he's too busy working on the cafe for now, but he's not sure what might happen later. Akane takes what she can get and leaves happily. The next day, the group heads to a public bathhouse, since theirs got broken on the way. Akane notices how chummy Rio's being with Hayato. At the bathhouse, the girls head to their section where they see their MILF business partner again. They hop in the tub, and the business partner asks what it's like to live with Hayato, and if any of them has caught feelings yet, but they all act embarrassed and Shiragiku even excuses herself. Akane turns to Riho and asks if she has feelings for Hayato, but Riho conveniently starts to feel dizzy and abandons the tub too. While she dries off, she tries to push back her feelings and put the cafe first, but is caught off guard when Akane bluntly tells her she likes Hayato. Akane asks Riho if she does too, but when Riho denies it, Akane reveals that she's confessed her feelings, but since Riho doesn't feel anything, she shouldn't mind. When they return to the house, Riho realizes she needs to buy ingredients for breakfast tomorrow, so Uka tells Hayato to go with her since it's late. While they're out, Hayato asks why she's been so out of it that day, but Riho just chalks it up to dehydration. Hayato immediately stops to get her a cold drink, and Riho starts wondering why he's being so nice to her. The whole way home, she can't stop wondering what his answer to Akane was and how he feels toward her now. When they arrive at the house, Riho realizes it's the perfect opportunity to confess to him since they're alone. So before Hayato can head inside, Riho grabs his arm and tells him she thinks she's in love with him, but chickens out by asking him what he would do if she said that. Hayato starts sweating rivers and tells her it would make him happy. Riho's eyes light up with joy and says it's enough if it makes him happy, leaving Hayato seriously confused. The next day, Riho walks in on Akane putting some moods on Hayato, so she chews them out for messing around, and when Hayato notices the stare down between the girls, he takes it as his cue to leave. When they're alone, Riho finally confesses her feelings for Hayato and tells her it pisses her off when Akane hits on him. Meanwhile, Hayato's suffering from being such a ladies' man, but his suffering only increases when he overhears two guys talking about the cafe. Back at the cafe, Ami walks in and hands the girls some mud balls for some games, but before playing, Akane apologizes for forcing Riho to finally spit out how she feels, and they both agree to be friendly rivals. However, Hayato busts in and starts begging them not to fight over his steez, but the girls assure him they aren't fighting. Ami tells him they were simply playing a game, and Hayato's so confused that he just runs out screaming like a lunatic, while the girls agree that he'll one day understand how serious they are. The next day, Hayato suggests they add some new options to their menu, and when Akane starts praising his idea, Riho jumps in and starts kissing ass too. Hayato remembers their confessions, but after what Ami said, he assumes they're all just messing with him and refuses to play along. Meanwhile, it turns out that Shiragiku had overheard Akane and Riho confessing their feelings for Hayato, and she begins to look sad. Later, Shiragiku and Hayato start cooking up a new menu item. When they're done, Shiragiku brings up how fast summer went, and when Hayato says it was because they were busy with the cafe, Shiragiku asks if it wasn't because something romantic happened. Hayato immediately remembers the two other thirsty maids, but decides to keep his lips sealed. Shiragiku cozies up to him and says there's someone she likes too. However, she reveals that even if the feeling is mutual, she could never date him cause she'll make him sad one day, but she reveals that she was the first one to fall in love with him. Hayato immediately begins to suspect that this girl has become some drunk lecher again. Shiragiku denies it, but in 2 more seconds, she's already stripping and trying to wiggle her way into his clothes. Akane walks in on them and warns Hayato that even she will get sick of this behavior. Later, Hayato wonders how on earth Shiragiku got drunk again, but wonders how much of what she said was real. Later, they go shopping for their new menu stuff when they run into some of their business partners. Hayato asks for advice on their new menu, and they say they learned everything they knew from his grandma, and mention something about a 3-star restaurant, but Shiragiku stops them before they spill the beans. When they leave, Hayato asks what Shiragiku knows about his grandma and what she keeps searching for every night. Shiragiku finally confesses that when she was younger, her dad brought her to the cafe to learn cooking from his grandma, who was a 3-star chef. Later, when Shiragiku was getting picked on by that turd-faced man, it was Hayato that rescued her, and that's how they first met. Hayato asks what his grandma was hiding from him, but Shiragiku reveals that his grams made her promise not to tell him. However, Hayato explains that he already knows the secret was that she quit working as a chef because of him. Later, Shiragiku finds Hayato alone in the cafe, and he continues to insist that his grams gave up her dreams to take care of him. But Shiragiku explains that when she asked his grandma if she regretted it, she simply said Hayato was now her new reason to live. Hayato finally understands his grams' feelings and promises not to let the cave go under, so Shiragiku promises to stay by his side and help him do it. Just then, the other girls bust in crying since they'd been eavesdropping the whole time, and they express how much they loved her. Later, the group decides to have a picnic together, And there, Shiragiku realizes that Sensei Hayato knows the truth. She's now free to confess her feelings and fight for his love. When Oka hears this, she realizes the others have been rizzed up already. But before she can say anything, Shiragiku accidentally sips some wine and turns on lecture mode. Years later, Hayato's all grown up, and his daughter returns from school to find an old picture from the cafe with her mom and 4 other women. However, when she asks Hayato when exactly he fell for her mom, Hayato simply claims he doesn't remember, but he's still a shit liar. Tell us your best guess for who he ended up with down in the comments, and if you like anime recaps like this, watch this video.